Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to the second quarter's continuing education safety roundtable. The reason why I look behind us is because I have two wonderful people with me here. I have Ethan and Jordan from one of our BASC organizations. I'm actually on site and get a chance to visit these fine folks and see the awesome things they're doing, just like the rest of you. So they've agreed to join me here as we go through this continuing education safety roundtable. And thank you all so much for joining. We have such great information today. I'm really excited to get this rolling. No real announcements for BASC right now, except like I said, you have the option for doing the online auditing system. We have started slowly adding customer portals in our website. So reach out to me about that if you'd like one. We're still kind of in beta. We've been in beta for a little bit, but we're still working those. And so if you want a client portal or a member portal, just reach out to me or Kalisa. And then one other thing to talk about is the alternate IEPs. So if you've already been through the cycle once before of IEP 1, 2, and 3 and the full IEP, we'd love to keep things fresh and provide you possibly alternate ones that you can use just for your education. You'll always have safety management, you'll always have training, but you might get some other content if you want other than Annex 6, Part 2, Section 2, Section 3. With that being said, I want to start with our first speakers for the Safety Roundtable. It is Walter Kraujalis and Chris Sylvia from Safety Standup, a company that provides really important safety management support, and they're going to talk to you about finding a ideal, right, virtual or safety manager. I hate to call them virtual because they actually are real people. They're
Right.
not virtual, but in a virtual setting. So with that, I'll just turn it over to you guys.
Well, good morning, everybody. There is my screen share. My name is Chris Sylvia. I'm joined today by Walter Kraujalis. We are with Safety Stand Up, and we are talking this morning about we're kind of tagging on to Jason's theme about going beyond compliance. So we're talking about maximizing the impact of a contract aviation safety officer. And like Jason said, during our presentation, we'll interchange the terms virtual and contract safety officer because those terms are kind of bandied about in the industry. I don't particularly favor virtual either because yes, we are real people. Makes it sound like we're AI or something, which we're not. You can see I'm like real here. So this is Walter Kraujalis joining me also. Say hi, Walter.
Hello, hello.
All right.
It's hard to tell which is AI and which is real nowadays.
So today I want to talk to some of you may have never heard of a contract safety officer or a virtual safety officer. So we're going to answer some core questions this morning. We're going to talk about what they are, what is a virtual safety officer, who provides this service, what are the benefits, and how do we structure the relationship to maximize the value. And then at the end, we'll look at a case study. And just keep in mind, this isn't about outsourcing safety. It's really about strengthening your risk management and your organizational resilience. All right, so this slide kind of gives you an idea of the various people in the safety officer space that provide this service. So when it's structured correctly, they just serve as like embedded safety leadership for your organization. They may do something as large as fulfilling the role of director of safety, or they could just provide support for an internal person in your organization. Most of these organizations are tied directly to a certain SMS platform. Safety Stand-Up is platform agnostic. So when you're in the decision-making process, just make sure you consider the pros and the cons to both of those systems. Walter, what do you think?
Exactly. I mean, we're going to speak from the perspective of how we handle our clients with Safety Stand Up. Like Chris said, we're platform agnostic. Um, it's a real person. You're assigned the same specialist. You'll develop a relationship, and you can kind of pick what kind of background do you want in your specialist. are they an active pilot, or maybe they have more of a SMS degree, or more on the education side of it. But all of our specialists are well versed in all the processes involved in the SMS. So again, we can engage, and again, it's similar with the others that are associated with the platform. We can engage at whatever level of participation you would want us. We can be just the scribe in the background, taking notes and helping schedule meetings, or we can be all the way to your full-time safety officer, where we handle the hazard reports. Everything just comes to us, just as if we were a full-time member of your team. So having support like this, it's allowed by all of the SMS standards out there, ISBEO, BASC. Having your safety officer doesn't necessarily have to be an employee. And so it's all about having a very effective and robust risk management system.
Oh, and I forgot to mention at the beginning that if you have any questions for us, you can most certainly put it in the chat and we can answer those questions. So you ask, why do I need a contract safety officer? So the simplest way to think about it is that the responsibilities of the safety office are usually a side job for somebody. And if they're busy, a contract safety officer gives you somebody whose only job is to keep your safety management program moving, right? So this is especially useful when you don't have a dedicated safety department, or if your current safety lead is stretched thin or unable to provide follow through. Maybe they're not good at the paperwork end of it. And it's especially helpful during periods of growth spurt or leadership transitions. These are times when things change quickly and the gaps tend to show up. And even if you're having like a downturn, right, and maybe your staffing is tight and you can't afford a full-time person, we could step in and provide that gap. If you're noticing low engagement in your safety management system, maybe people are tuning out or the programs aren't really working, your participation is dropping. Sometimes an outside safety lead can provide and reset expectations, rebuild momentum, provide a fresh, clean restart. So the bottom line is that if you want the safety management system to run to your full effectivity, not just being a paperwork exercise, bringing in a contract safety officer can definitely be a practical way to improve your situation. All right, so
phone ringing in the background there. If you can go back one slide, Chris.
Sorry. Yeah,
it's we all know when we're hurting. So if been there, done that, seen it. We've seen it with our clients, where the safety officer, it's a collateral duty typically. They're doing a full-time flight schedule or a full-time job, whatever their position is in the flight department. And you got to be pretty motivated to, when you get to the hotel room, crack open your laptop and start processing some safety reports. Or when you're doing them, when you're back from a trip, and so it's easy to get overloaded, or finding shortcuts, or and there's a recent phenomenon, kind of brought on with COVID, and then we had this pilot flurry, shortage flurry, where pilots now just want to fly and don't want to do collateral duties. And so the safety function can kind of be left behind. And so we're there at whatever level to support and keep your SMS robust. So it's easy to understand when you're like hurting and behind. But the other way to look at it is to be proactive, is before we let our safety officer burn out, before we get to the point that we're hurting, is to engage support. having the support is a whole lot cheaper than hiring a full-time safety person. We're a fraction of the cost of somebody's salary. So, maybe before you're hurting, consider it. So, continue.
All right. So how does it work exactly? Right. So what does it look like in practice? So Walter, you can go ahead and talk about this whole slide.
So, there's obviously a lot of similarities in everybody's SMSs. We all have the four pillars. Some of you are part five, some of you aren't. And so uh, we review your SMS. The idea is we're going to do a work scope from the tasks that are listed in your SMS. For example, it typically says the safety officer, in conjunction with whoever, will review the safety policy on an annual basis. Okay, so it's a simple spreadsheet. We write down the tasks that are annual. Perhaps it says you will hold a quarterly safety meeting. Okay, well, that's in the quarterly column. And then, of course, daily would be any safety report that comes in. So we review it. If we see from our background and experience that, hey, here's another way to consider that process. We'll help you brush up your SMS from that perspective. But we'll do the work scope and then assign who does what. One example is we've seen where the safety officer was quarterly supposed to check the safety equipment on the aircraft. Well, we're real people, but we're remote and we're not there. So someone in your organization has to do that. So we'll make that a task for a person on site. Otherwise, if it's holding meetings, holding discussions, just as we're having this communication with a Zoom call, we do the same thing with our clients. So in the beginning, we typically, for the first 2 or 3 months, we'll meet often, weekly probably, just to get to know each other, have your specialist know you and you know the specialist. Um, you'll find that as specialists, we'll use the term we and us as because we are integrating to be a member of your team. We're not going to say, hey, your SMS is doing this and your SMS. It's like, okay, our SMS wants us to do this. So we'll meet weekly, and then after we're comfortable, because there might be an awkwardness of, oh, who's doing that task, and is that you or me? Yeah. Another one where there's a sharing a task is the internal audit process. Uh, Obviously, being remote, there's certain things we can do, but it usually and we need the support of somebody on site or who has access to certain documents. Our specialists are given full access to the SMS. We absolutely believe and understand in confidentiality. We have an engagement letter. There's a specific section in there that discusses confidentiality and security of data. And so, we're very serious about that. And then, of course, we have a login to whatever platform you're using. If you're using Baldwin, you're using Vocus, you're using whichever one, just give us a login and we will enter the data right into the platform. We try to keep, in fact, most of our communication on the platform. Most platforms have a way of sending messages or adding somebody to a task, and that sends them an email to alert them that they've been assigned this task, part of an investigation or whatever. So we'll focus on that. In fact, we use the full functionality of these platforms as much as possible, as opposed to jumping off into emails, because then it's a data. How do you collect the data and keep it all together? So, Chris, back to you.
All right. Thank you. And so our next slide is kind of a case study. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. So on this particular organization, there, as you look through these different bullet points, I think we can all see one of the problems that we encounter every day with SMS, right? We had a recent audit, and it was a little hard. We passed, but it was kind of uncomfortable. We have a high employee turnover rate, 3 safety officers in 3 years, and the safety officer is always being assigned to the new guy, right? So when this stuff happens, you end up with a knowledge pass down that doesn't really occur effectively. And so it just makes for difficult situations. So how do we benefit this organization? How does a contract safety officer make this work? We have a dedicated safety specialist. We give them an unbiased outside perspective. We provide collaboration and stability. And like Walter said, always confidential. And when you're working with that specific safety specialist, you always have a backup person, right? So if I'm a safety specialist on your account, Walter's my backup, and either he'll attend meetings or he'll provide backup information as we brief on a weekly basis about the various about our organization. Walter, did you have anything?
Just a couple things is, we are from the outside, but we're a member of your team. And often, especially like if the new guy is the safety officer, the safety function has to have the full respect that it's an integral part of your processes. And so, we're by contract obligated to make sure you follow all the steps of your SMS, and we're going to cross T's and dot I's. And so we will hold the meeting. It takes some of the the personalities out of it, the politics out of it, of a flight department. The new guy who's the safety officer might be intimidated to investigate somebody of what they did. So here it's a little more sanitary. We're engaged to do these functions, and we're going to do it. So, and we can. Obviously, we're humans, so we bring our experience that we have from other departments and other SMSs that we've worked with. Again, fully confidential, but there might be a clever way of looking at things. So,
all right. So we're out of time. We're going to do. Here's your takeaways, real quick. Cost-effective solution. We're industry engaged expertise, and you can get a scalable, right? So as little or as much as you want. And we're all of us are on a quest for a just safety culture. If anybody has any questions, they can dial in 833-FLY-RIGHT or go to safetystandup.com. I am Chris, that is Walter, and we thank you for your time.
Chris, Walter, thank you so much. Just to comment on that, when especially with the pilot turnover that we saw in the previous years, that I experienced, that the safety manager seemed to be like a step up into like chief pilot or director of operations. So there was always a knowledge gap there, and safety managers need to be taught. So we've been seeing, like you said, Vocus, Baldwin, Wyvern have been starting to offer these services to provide stability in that role, which is so important, from anywhere from mentoring to, as you said, full-blown safety managers. So I think we're seeing this as becoming a more important service, especially as safety management might become regulated across the different segments. So I really appreciate this knowledge and what we should be looking for in order to make sure we get the right person or the right company into that role. So thank you very much. Thank you guys so much. And again, if you have any questions, even afterwards, you can contact me or contact them directly. Which moves us on to Allison. Absolutely wonderful person. But Allison, she is an experienced psychotherapist. She's the founder of Arene, I want to make sure I said that right, Psychotherapy Services. She is a former United flight attendant who brings a very unique aviation-informed perspective to her private practice. She has extensive experience in substance abuse disorder treatment, complex trauma, shame resiliency, and HIV care. She's built an all-inclusive practice dedicated to serving individuals from all walks of life, including marginalized communities. As a former board member of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, NAMI, in the Valley of the Sun, Allison is passionate about destigmatizing mental health care and advocating for its accessibility, particularly as a standard of care for aviation professionals. She's an avid community volunteer. She remains actively engaged in the mental health, aviation, and broader advocacy communities. She lives in Sonoma County, California, with her pilot husband, Don, and her Dachshund, give it a little German accent, Klaus. And on a side note, that I had the privilege of presenting with Allison at BASC last year, and she really attacked a topic that's becoming more important that we're seeing in aviation, even corporate aviation, of this mental well-being and mental resilience. So, Allison, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jason. That was quite an introduction, and I'm really honored to be here. Good morning, everybody. Let me get my screen up so we can begin. Okay. So I want to make this presentation interactive today. So I do encourage you to use the chat function. Just making sure, Jason, everything look good?
Everything looks great on my side, Allison.
Okay, wonderful. Then we'll get started. So, as Jason indicated, I am a psychotherapist in private practice. I'm licensed in both Arizona and California. I specialize in working with aviation professionals. I come to this having had a career of 13 years with Continental/United, and my husband is a commercial pilot. So I view mental health for aviation professionals from a very personal place. And we're talking about mental resilience today because it does impact safety. There is a very real connection between how we're able to process our emotions and deal with distressing experiences and still perform the job safely. So looking at kind of what we're going to focus on today, we're going to understand mental resilience in aviation. What does that mean? What does that look like? What are the common psychological challenges that people face? Techniques for strengthening mental resilience. So I'm going to come up with a few different techniques that you can employ kind of in the moment when you need them, when you're feeling overwhelmed or that distress is just getting too heavy. And that'll help kind of take some of the pressure off and put us back into that moment so that we can handle things from the part of our brain that really responds rather than reacts. And then what does it mean to embrace change in aviation? We'll kind of get into what do we do next? Where do we go from here? So mental resilience in aviation really does have an impact on safety and performance, as we've indicated. There are multiple research studies, peer-reviewed research studies out there that show the numbers. I don't have the exact numbers, but I do know that there is a significant correlation between the two. So let's talk a little bit about pilot-specific mental health statistics. So these are not great numbers, and unfortunately, there are not very many current studies that show these statistics. So these are old numbers, and that is something to take into account when we look at having gone through COVID, how that impacted just the general population in general, but also how did that impact aviation professionals? Because there was a huge burden placed on aviation professionals during that time. So when these numbers were identified, 24% met the criteria for a common mental health disorder. That's major depressive disorder, anxiety, possibly PTSD, adjustment disorder, panic, things like that. So when we look at the national average of 20%, we can actually see that there's quite a bump for pilots specifically. 13% met the criteria for major depressive disorder. The national average is 8% of the population. 4% reported suicidal thoughts, and 40% reported high burnout rate, which is really important when we're looking at where are these numbers coming from, because they really are impacted by burnout. And aviation professionals, as we can see, have elevated statistics over the general public. I'm not entirely sure who I'm speaking to today, so I'm keeping this very general. So I'm bringing in pilots, but also flight attendants and operations. And I do think it's important to acknowledge that for flight attendants, there was a study done by the CDC that found that flight attendants who died by suicide is 1.5 times higher than the national average. We don't have the statistics on pilots, unfortunately, but if we're looking at these numbers, chances are there's a greater chance that it's elevated as well. So why is this happening? What is creating this environment which is causing these numbers to be as elevated as they are? And so we're looking at what are the unique stressors in aviation. The lifestyle of it can be very difficult. So in the therapy world, we would call this biopsychosocial, right? So we're looking at a holistic approach of what creating these unique stressors. So one of the stressors, the biological stressor, right? The physical. So what are you dealing with? You're dealing with fatigue. You're dealing with potentially long days or multiple legs. You're dealing with jet lag. You're dealing with starting your day at odd hours at any point, finishing your day at odd hours. Diet. It's very hard to eat well when we're on the road. So we may not be getting or setting ourselves up to the best physical ability. Exercise, right? I know that people exercise on their layovers or their time off, but when we're talking about actually in the aircraft, is there actually room to get up and move around? If there is, how much do you have? How much space do you have? How often can you do it? So it's a very sedentary experience. And then we're dealing with pressurization, which also causes biological stressors, right? Physical stressors. We know that. The emotional part, the isolation, the loneliness. Being on the road can be very isolating, very lonely. You may have a crew that you get along with very well. You may have a crew that you don't quite mesh with. I know in the business aviation world, unlike the commercial aviation world, you may have a very small flight department. Hopefully the personalities click. Hopefully the person you're flying with consistently is someone that you get along with and you can spend some time with. But nonetheless, they're still seeing the isolation and the loneliness. Then you have the workload, right? So the high stress that's happening in these very short moments, followed by periods of maybe just boredom where you're just tracking, monitoring, and then the expectation of resilience that comes from the organizations, right? The idea that pilots are above human capacity, that they don't experience the same stressors to the same degree, right? This isn't impacted by them. And one of the things that really struck me when I was in graduate school and still flying is that I would talk to the flight deck about their position on mental health and how they felt about it. And only once did I get a different answer, but I would say 99 out of 100 times, the answer I got was, pilots don't deal with that. And then another response I got was, oh, don't worry, I'll tell on them later. So basically it was denial and deflection. But what we're really doing is we're dismissing our own personal and lived experiences. Expectations of resilience are very unfair because they change based on a multitude of factors. That brings us into the mental piece, the compartmentalization. When I was talking with Jason early on about what we wanted to put into the presentation, one of the things he mentioned, a question he brought up was, is compartmentalization healthy? And I think that that's a very important piece to address because as pilots, you're trained to compartmentalize, right? You're trained to focus on the work at hand and be very vigilant about what you're doing and kind of block out the world beyond that. And I feel like most people who make it through training and into a professional position of being a pilot are good at compartmentalization. You almost have to be. Those that can't do that well often don't find this job very satisfying. Compartmentalization can be very effective. It gives us the ability to focus on the task at hand. Our brain has the ability to do that under moments of distress anyways. The challenge with compartmentalization is it stops us from integrating our life, right? So there are quite literally different compartments of life that exist, and mental well-being is built on the integration of all of the different components of our life. So compartmentalization is necessary and it can be very effective. But in terms of mental well-being, it isn't healthy. And I do think that that's an important thing to recognize. Another piece of this is going to be the social, right? Missing the important moments. You may not have control over your entire schedule. You may miss birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, kids' recitals. There are things that maybe are very important to you, but you still don't have the opportunity to just say, okay, I'm going to take an hour off of work and go see this. It's quite different. Disrupted communication. So again, depending on your schedule, what does that look like? The time zones. Are you able to communicate with your family as often as you want or your loved ones? And then the personality challenges. What are people dealing with when they're on the road? Who are they flying with? How do you mesh? And when we're looking at the psychological resilience factors for aviation professionals, one of the biggest ones, I mean, we know that it's stress, sleep, diet, exercise, activities, but the biggest one is relationships. So if we don't have solid relationships, then we're coming back into this place where we're experiencing the isolation and the loneliness. So what is the definition of mental resilience? It's a capacity to adapt positively to adversity, stress, changing demands, maintaining composure, and effective performance under pressure. It does not mean avoiding distress. I think that this is a very important piece. Mental resilience is not about avoiding distress. It's about working through the emotional pain and learning from it. Again, this is where compartmentalization can get in the way. Why does this matter? There's a connection to better overall mental health means lower burnout, higher situational awareness, improved decision-making, safety, right? Supporting operational safety. These are very important things. And I'm really glad that we're talking about this so openly in the aviation community. So some additional stressors that might come up, milestone moments, job changes. In business aviation, there can be even less stability than there is in the Part 121, and we know how unstable that can be. Retirement, mandated age of retirement, that can throw people off, especially if they don't feel ready. If their job is such a part of their identity, that can create ongoing stressors. The compartmentalization, there it is again. Discrimination. So marginalized groups will have a unique stressor that doesn't exist for a majority group. And different organizations exist to help support different marginalized groups. We have the NGPA, the OBAT, Women in Aviation, PAPA, right? So these different organizations are there because of the unique stressors of being a marginalized group in aviation. And then what about military service? How many people have come from the military, and what are the effects that have come with them? Okay, so let's get into strengthening mental resilience. Before we do that, we're going to talk about burnout for a moment. I don't want to be too much of a downer here, but let's acknowledge what we're experiencing. So what happens when we're experiencing burnout, right? We're going to have a physical health decline, increased isolation. There's that piece again. Substance use, abuse. This is very rampant in the aviation community, mainly because it's a way of self-medicating and it's socially acceptable. Crews meet after they get to their destination for a drink or to hang out and have dinner. And sometimes what happens is it turns into something very problematic. When it becomes the thing that relieves the distress, then we're entering into an area where there's potential for problems. Decline in interpersonal family relationships. Being gone is very hard on relationships. It's hard on both sides, and I can attest to that. If I'm looking a little tired, it's because my husband had to wake up at 3 a.m. today and leave the house by 3:30. That was not ideal. It can create stress, right? Both for him and for me. Being gone, not being able to communicate when things are happening. For some reason, our air conditioning would always break when he's on the road. That's an additional stressor, right? So those are small stressors. There are bigger stressors that come in. Decreased work capacity, legal financial problems, shame, right? Shame is a big one. Suicidal thoughts, and then getting into a suicide attempt. So again, they can kind of build upon themselves. There's research that came out through the Aerospace Medical Association. It was published in their journal, in the Aerospace Medicine and Human Performance Journal in 2025, so very recent. And it was research out of China, but it showed that the emergence of job burnout, it's not an instantaneous occurrence, right? But rather a result of a cumulative effect of various stressors. And this happens over an extended period of time. So what do we do with these stressors? What do we bring to build that resilience? Self-awareness, openness to change, emotional intelligence, a sense of agency. That's a very important one. And sometimes that gets lost with a job in aviation when we don't have a lot of control over our schedule. Or again, the idea that even talking about it, approaching the conversation around mental health can feel very threatening. That takes away our sense of agency. being adaptable, having those social supports in place, effective communication, and belief in one's capabilities. So just like you do competence and confidence training, right? Simulator situations when you go for annual trainings or even just new trainings, something like this. Why are we not doing this with real life emotional regulation, right? There are modalities that could be very effective, like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy, right? These are almost teaching modalities that help in building these resilience factors. So some of the ways that we would do that would be through learning how to reframe emotional experiences, redirecting our emotions, managing the distress, and then different emotional resilience techniques, getting comfortable with emotions. Depending on the environment that we grew up in, we may not be comfortable with certain emotions. Certain emotions may not have been allowed or safe in our home. And so therefore we try to keep those very far away. But the truth is that, again, mental well-being means an integration, a full integration of our experiences. So then this is going to talk a little bit about the window of tolerance, which is it's a construct to help understand our nervous system a little better. Our window of tolerance is what I like to call our emotional sweet spot. So whatever's coming at me, I have the capacity to handle, right? Good or bad. I am in the right mindset to be able to think rationally and come up with realistic solutions. Sorry for my drawing. It's not great, but nonetheless, here it is. So what this represents is kind of the flow that we go through throughout the day, right? Our window of tolerance, when we're in our optimal zone, right? Our emotional sweet spot. Again, we're going to have some ups and downs within it, but as long as we're within the boundary of that window of tolerance, we have the capacity to handle things. When we're under extreme stress or in distressful situations, what ends up happening is our nervous system responds like this. So we have these very high peaks and valleys that throw us outside of our capacity to handle things. When we get above our window of tolerance, that's where we're going to be in that fight or flight response, right? We're going to have increased sensations. We're going to be flooded with emotion, reactivity, hypervigilant. We're going to have intrusive thoughts or flashbacks and disorganized cognitive processing. So when you're flying, whether you're aware of it or not, your adrenaline is going to be elevated. So when we're in the hyper-aroused zone or the zone above our window of tolerance, that is when our adrenaline is activated. So the truth is that you may already be towards the top of your window of tolerance, if not slightly above it during moments of flight because of that hyper-aroused state or that hyper-vigilant state. So we may already be dealing with any distress that comes our way could throw us into that hyper-aroused zone. And then our nervous system has this amazing capacity that when we are elevated, when our adrenaline has been raised, it will match it with cortisol, right? Because what our nervous system is looking for is kind of a balance. So if we have this hypervigilance, this adrenaline, we're going to match it with that cortisol, which is going to bring us down. And that often is where we feel numbing, disabled cognitive processing, sort of like that depressive state. Okay, so I know we're kind of getting close on time. So I'm going to pick one of these. There are multiple stress management techniques out there. The one I'm going to pick this is actually my favorite. salivation technique. So I don't want to get into the way that the brain is reorganizing itself during this time. But what's really important to know is that when we're under stress, moments of stress or distress, we shut off non-essential systems, right? All of our energy goes into that fight or flight. It goes into survival. And so what you might notice is your mouth will go dry, right? One of the non-essential systems is digestion. So salivation, if we have the wherewithal, we can notice that, right? We can check in and see, is my mouth dry? If we can focus on getting ourselves to salivate, right? We can tell ourselves to salivate and it will happen. If it doesn't, we have something like water. We can take a sip of water, and what happens is it puts us back, even for a moment, into that window of tolerance, into that regulated state. And no one knows we're doing it. That's why it's my favorite. So something to practice. See what you feel. Notice what happens in your chest and your stomach. Notice if you feel a decrease in that pressure or the tension. And it may only last for a moment. That's okay. We can do it over and over and over again. And truthfully, the more that we do it, the more we practice it, the longer that period of release is going to last. So embracing change in aviation. We have to change the culture. Regulations are changing, and that's wonderful. That's coming from the top. But unless the culture starts to shift, it's still going to be very difficult to have these conversations, to implement mental health trainings and support. So from an operational standpoint, if any of you are on here, culture really does play a vital role in resilience, right? It reduces the stigma around mental health. It encourages people seeking help. You can bring psychological safety and open communication protocols to your organization, right? There can be higher incident reporting accuracy, proactive safety management, peer-led initiatives, and visible leadership support. So that's the big one. What can you do as an organization to support the well-being of your employees? And at BASC, I was very impressed by how many organizations were actually wanting to talk about this. We're very open to how do we bring this in to support our employees. So let's keep this conversation going. Again, this will help with decreasing the hesitancy to report. So where do we need to go still? Well, we just destigmatizing mental health in pilot culture, right? Making more medications acceptable, looking at ADHD diagnoses, remove the burden of seeking mental health support. AME education, very important, because if the AMEs aren't trained in what to look for or how to provide the resources, then we have a whole area that's not being addressed. And then reduce the circumstances leading to underreporting or healthcare avoidance, right? And this is where we get into the safety piece again. Putting the power back into the hands of the pilots, giving them that sense of agency will help create that mental resilience, which will then connect to increased outcomes of safety. So in conclusion, mental resilience for aviation is really about stress management, our support networks, the commitment of the organization, and then the sustained resilience. So continuing self-assessment, continuing to look at how are you feeling? What are the stressors that you're dealing with in your life? Who are the safe people to talk to about that? And then in conclusion, I put up a little kind of flow chart here because I know pilots love their flow charts. But this is a way of self-assessment, right? We look at the situation, the where, the when, the who, what happened, thoughts and images. What did you feel? What went through your mind at that time? What would you maybe said or wanted to do? And then checking into the body, physical sensations, the mood and emotions, and coming down to the behavior. What did I do or didn't do? And this is this is straight out of a CBT workbook. So again, cognitive behavioral therapy, not so scary. Really, it's about learning how to reframe and redirect, right? And through that is how we continue to build that mental resiliency. That is all I have for this presentation today. I thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this, and I want to open this up to any questions that might be out there.
Well, before I get to the questions, Allison, I just wonder if I could make a couple comments. I really appreciate you bringing this to the forefront. I know, like we did the presentation last year, it is stigmatized, and it's something, like you said, we go through really intense technical training, whether it's maintenance, flight ops, and it allows us to do a job that does come with mental well-being aspects that we're not trained on. And I was discussing here with my colleagues, we were listening, but one of the things we were discussing is that, yes, while we talked about pilots, but we have support personnel, mechanics, dispatchers, that have to also adjust to the erratic or unpredictable schedule of flight ops, which can lead to some of those stressors, especially like isolation and missing events. So I think this is great for any aviation personnel, and you may be happy to learn that one of the very popular providers of training, especially in business aviation, has developed a mental well-being module for pilots or for aviation professionals. So that is a new development. So I hope we're seeing that movement into that space and the importance of it. So I just wanted
That's fantastic. Yeah.
So here's one of the questions that came up is, what sort of questions should we be asking each other to show up the red flags in our lives?
That's a great question. Well, I think the first place to start is to really look at how, if we're talking about questions that we're asking ourselves, how are we feeling in our body? Our body tells us a lot of the information and the data. So, am I feeling tension? Am I feeling hot? Am I feeling numb? Right? These are data points that we can work from, and we can take it to the next step. Okay, what are the things that are causing this in my life? What are the stressors? If we're talking about questions to each other, then we're getting into a space of vulnerability. We can ask the questions, but are we going to get the actual answer? But if you're seeing a red flag in someone you're working with, it helps to just pull them aside, right? And do this privately. So not in front of anyone else, but just express a concern, speak from your own perspective, what you're noticing, and don't force them into saying anything, but give them the space to know that you're available if they need to talk about something. Again, that takes people from being on the spot, because that can feel very intimidating and that can shut us down. But even just a question is, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling today?
That's an excellent
I don't know if
point.
that answers the question.
I believe it does. Yeah, I kind of want to move into another area though, that another question that comes up, and I see that comes up is, so when we did the presentation together, my part of it was integrating mental well-being tools into a safety management system. And also as part of that, we talk a lot about psychological safety, and that's a big term that we use just even in regular safety management and reporting issues. But as you pointed out aptly, it all starts at the top. It starts with leadership. So one of the questions I get asked is, how do we, maybe as safety managers or even concerned individuals in our organization, how do we frame that conversation with leadership? Do you have any suggestions or thoughts on that to take this as a point of education or help?
I think the best way to frame that with an organization is through directness, having the statistics showing what the correlation is. Again, I don't have the exact number, but it's something like 25 to 30% reduction in safety incidents when we have mental resiliency. So having all of that, being direct and recognizing that if we're coming at it from a safety management standpoint, this is a component, and I would say just being as direct as possible, why it matters.
So I like that. So we can put it into even as data, because we like to present data.
Data is great. I love data.
It is fantastic, and saying its implications on safety that's data based, I think, like you said, is a powerful conversation tool to
Mhm.
that you have in your pocket. We did get a statement in, and it's unfortunate, but I'd love for you to weigh in on it. The statement is that the FAA is a significant issue. You're risking your job. And that's what we as aviation professionals see in terms of the regulator and their view. So it always isn't maybe in the organization. Sometimes it's that view of the FAA and our medicals. So what do you see going on in the FAA, or how are they starting to approach this now?
That's a great comment, and that is a huge problem. The FAA actually has made some strides in their what they the regulations, what they've changed, but they haven't come far enough, and that's still a problem. And yes, that is why we see that hesitancy to report. That's why we see kind of the shadow side of mental health in aviation. And it risks a career, an identity, a sense of purpose. All of these things are hugely important. So some of the changes that have happened under Dr. Susan Northrup, they've allowed certain diagnoses to be, I don't want to say acceptable is not the right word, but essentially they will issue a license, a medical certificate with certain diagnoses. So anxiety, major depressive disorder, single incident. But that's this is also problematic because if we're talking about seeking help, right, pilots can't use their insurance, because if they use their insurance to go see a therapist, then there's going to be a diagnosis. You have to have a diagnosis to bill the insurance. So not all therapists understand the implications of what this means to a career, to the individual. So yes, the FAA is making changes. It's very slow. Dr. Quay Snyder, I was at one of his presentations, and he talked about the changes happening at I believe he phrased it, a glacial pace, but they are happening. In the meantime, peer support is an option. So a lot of organizations are looking at peer support because it doesn't bring the component of a diagnosis into it. Certain medications, right? The FAA has allowed for special issuance licenses, but again, it's problematic because one of my friends, Troy Merritt, was actually in the New York Times talking about this. He's a United pilot, And he's very open about it, which is amazing. But he talked about the amount of time it took to get his special issuance license when he went on an antidepressant, and he had to, right? It was to the point in his life where he couldn't function otherwise. But the fact is, it took, I believe, almost 18 months to get that special issuance license. And then, if there are any changes to the medication, even going off of the medication, you have to go through the whole process again. So, again, things are happening, but they're not happening well. So, peer support is an option. Again, if there are mental health trainings out there, that can be effective, right? Just learning some of the CBT techniques and like dealing with um, emotional resilience and working through them. I have a coaching entity because it means that I don't have to have a diagnosis and there's no clinical record when I work with pilots. But then that brings it into the challenge of, but you can't use your insurance. So yes, that comment about the FAA and the impact on career is very, very warranted.
Thank you for that. I know, do you have time to stick around just for a couple more? I'm glad we're getting
Yeah.
questions on this. And I hope you guys out there are okay just sticking around for maybe two more questions. The first one is, and I see this too when I go into organizations, and sometimes we have the discussion about mental well-being. And a lot of times we get a reference to the employee assistance program that an organization may have. What is something do you think that's a good avenue? Have you seen employee assistance programs in other organizations addressing mental well-being? What are your thoughts?
So my understanding of the employee assistance program is usually they're contracted with outside providers. So what they do is they help you find that outside provider, and then they have that contract where they will cover a certain amount of sessions. Um, Again, this isn't as effective for pilots because if you are, anybody can contract with an EAP. So they may not necessarily have any understanding of aviation professionals, regulations, the limitations. So if you're referred to someone through the EAP, it's really important to just ask them the questions. Do you understand what this means to my career? Do you provide a diagnosis? Again, they're billing the EAP, which is part of the insurance company. And so you often have to have a diagnosis. And some therapists are willing to put adjustment disorder, right? It's a very benign diagnosis. It just means you're struggling at a period of time in this moment. It's usually like a 6-month kind of situation. Others are a little bit more stringent about documenting what they're seeing as kind of a clinical record of someone's experiences. So if you do go through the EAP and you are referred out, make sure you ask those questions because that can come back as a problem in the future.
Well, that's super helpful. Thank you for that. Did not know that. The last question, we'll make this the last question. It's really a good question slash point. We've been talking about aviation professionals in the context of pilots, mechanics, flight attendants, especially in the corporate world. But let's look at it more whole, ATC and the stresses they've been going through. We've seen some key events that related to ATC stress. Are they using any of these techniques that you know of to deal with, or how is mental well-being viewed in that realm?
I love that question. To whoever asked that question, thank you. I've actually done presentation for ATC for female air traffic controllers. And here's the thing about ATC. If we think that pilot regulations are stringent, ATC is worse. ATC has none of these pieces in place. When did I do that talk? It was maybe June-ish. sometime around BASC, when we were at BASC. So that was like May of last year. They had just started to implement their peer support program. So it hadn't even been put online yet for ATC to seek any sort of peer support assistance. So they are actually very behind in mental health standards and what they're doing and how they're supporting their employees and the organization. And that is a huge point, especially with the incidents that have happened lately and the shortage of controllers and the stress that that's putting on them additionally. And again, they have an even more erratic schedule than pilots or flight attendants or mechanics may have.
Right. That's an excellent point. And thank you for answering that. I know I'm not sure we have many controllers on here, but it's very relevant in terms
It
of
is.
aviation world. Look at the aviation world as a whole. I think we're looking for ways to bring this important topic up more and advocate for it because we are human, right? I mean, we're not machines that are working on planes or flying planes. And I am super appreciative of you and those that advocate with you for this very important topic. So I know we're out of time, but Allison, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time. It's so good to see you again.
Thank you, Jason. It was an honor to be here. And thank you, everyone who sat through my presentation. I hope that in some way it just sheds a little bit more light on this topic.
Yeah, I think it's very important. Chris, Walter, also thank you so much for being here, giving the information on what we can look for augment or for help in safety management services. And finally, Jordan, Ethan, thank you, gentlemen, for having me here. It's been an honor to be here with you. So, Kalisa, thank you so much for your support. And we are looking at for the next leadership webinar, May 20th, and then the next continuing education safety roundtable. We're looking not till July 14th. So that's coming up quick. So until then, guys, thank you for what you do out there. Stay safe.